We want to turn now to a guest who's joining us in the studio. It's Paul Bremer. I want to make sure I'm getting your name right because I'm just meeting you just at this moment. You're a terrorism expert,
counterterrorism, I hope,
and can talk to us a little bit about who could. I mean, there are a limited number of groups who could be responsible for something of this magnitude.
Yes, this is a very well planned, very well coordinated attack, which suggests it's very well organized centrally, and there are only 3 or 4 candidates in the world, really, who could have conducted this attack.
Bin Laden comes to mind right away, Mr. Bremer.
Indeed, he certainly does. Bin Laden was involved in the first attack on the World Trade Center, which had as its intention doing exactly what happened here, which was to collapse both towers. He certainly has to be a prime suspect, but there are others in the Middle East, and there are at least 2 states, Iran and Iraq, which should at least remain on the list of potential suspects.
What kind of coordination would, I mean, how could something like this be put together?
Well, you'd have to have, first of all, you've got to find some people who are willing to die, which is not that easy. And then, of course, they have to find ways around what we thought was pretty good security at our airports. We haven't had a hijacking in a long time, let alone 4. So there had to have been some very good coordination there. There has to have been coordination in the whole planning of the attack. The people, if they were not Americans, had to get visas to get into the United States. They needed false identities probably to buy airplane tickets. They needed cars to get to the airport. I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff that had to happen here.
Go ahead.
Well, with as many resources as our government and our allies' governments around the world devote to studying terrorism and knowing what's going on and what they're planning, you have to wonder how something of this magnitude, how this could take place without any warning or any hint that it was coming.
First of all, the intelligence against terrorists is the hardest intelligence there is to gather. Basically, you have to have a spy in the terrorist group who's willing to talk to you for whatever reason. It's the hardest intelligence there is. The National Commission on Terrorism, which I chaired last year, made as our key recommendation a much more vigorous effort to try to get terrorist spies as informing on their colleagues to us. Every time there's a major terrorist attack, it is automatically, of course, an intelligence failure. That's by definition. But I'm sympathetic to the problem about how you get good intelligence on these people. It's not easy. There is an intelligence failure here. There is a massive security failure where we have 4 airplanes being hijacked in the same morning, 2 from Dulles Airport, it appears. So there's a lot of lessons that are going to have to be learned. But first, we've got to find out who did it.
Mr. Bremer, I want to speak to that for a second. When the Oklahoma City incident occurred, the immediate response from a lot of people was that it came from some Arab terrorist group. Is there any reason why we ought to be cautious about that kind of an assumption on this particular incident, on these incidents?
Well, of course. What you have to work with at this stage, since we don't have any hard intelligence apparently and we don't have any forensic evidence, is motivations and capabilities. And so when I list 4 potential groups, I'm working mostly from motivations and proven capabilities in the past. Doesn't mean that you can exclude that some other kind of group could have come out of nowhere and done this, but at least as a working hypothesis in the first chaotic hours here after this attack, you have to start somewhere, and you have to start with what you know about the past and which groups have motives.
One of the things that the President said today from Florida early on was that the United States will respond to this, and he left it at that. Is it to be assumed that the first thing that we have to figure out is to identify precisely who it is we're going to respond against?
Of course. Basically, we have sort of a 4-stage operation here. First, we've got to hope and help that we can save as many people as possible, stabilize the situation in the Pentagon and in New York. Secondly, we need to get to work on trying to identify the perpetrators. And then thirdly, we come to the question about retaliation. And fourthly, which goes along all along at the same time, is what are the lessons we learned? What did we learn about the intelligence failure? What did we learn about the security failure? And how do we move forward in the future on those areas?
I don't recall anything like this. Pearl Harbor happened a month before I was born, and I hear my parents talk about that as a seminal event in their lives all the time. I am not aware of anything like this in the United States before. Americans are now, I think it's fair to say, really scared. Should we be?
This is a day that will change our lives, isn't it?
It is a day that will change our lives. It's a day when the war the terrorists declared on the United States, and after all, they did declare war on us, has been brought home to the United States in a much more dramatic way than we've seen before. So it will change our lives. I do think it's important, and I'm sure the President and his colleagues, when they start talking about this, it's important to hit some balance. The American way of life is not threatened by these people unless we threaten it ourselves. If we start throwing away the democratic freedoms and the civil liberties that are at the heart of our society, that's what they're after, and that's what we can't allow to have happen. And we've got to go about our business. People have got to move around. I was diverted on a plane this morning. I was trying to get to New York and wound up in Baltimore, and I in a way, was sort of at least relieved to see business as usual going on among people. We have to go on with our lives. It's not to say we don't take it seriously. We take it very seriously, but it's not something where we can all jump in a foxhole somewhere and hope the world doesn't come and bother us. We have to find a balanced response, one that makes it absolutely clear, as the President said this morning, that we're not going to tolerate this act of war. This will have consequences for the people who did it. I hope, very severe consequences. I hope the most severe military response we can come up with. But we also have to remember that we've got a way of life to protect, and that this doesn't threaten, this is not an existential threat to the United States.
All right. Paul Bremer, thank you.
We appreciate it, Mr. Bremer. Thank you very much.
We should make it clear that there has been no claim of responsibility at this point for any of these events.
Not yet. Susan Kidd upstairs in our newsroom with